We are delighted to be hosting this with Assembly Member-elect Anna Kellis, who I presume most of you know. She will be representing those of you in the New York State Assembly District 125 in the incoming legislature. So I will hand it over to you, Anna, if you'd like to kick it off with a few words before Rob goes deep into his 2020 overview.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coordinating this. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So I just looked at the list of participants, and I think I know almost everybody here. I don't know how well people know my background, so I did want to just run through and first of all, thank EANY. Just so everybody knows, I've been working with EANY for years now. These are some of my mentors, my allies, and sort of a lifeblood, I think, at the state level for the environmental advocacy. I have been in this seat, not even officially, just as a member-elect for about a month, and talk about a fire hose I've been drinking from. I think it's about 15 meetings a day, meeting with advocacy groups, meeting with my colleagues, coordinating efforts, and doing press conferences. It has been an amazing experience. One of the most important is organizing a cohesive environmental initiative. For anybody who doesn't know me, my background, my undergrad was environmental studies. I was a guide in the Amazon jungle for a year and was in South America for 4 years. My PhD was in nutritional epidemiology, but I was looking specifically on the impact of changes in the built environment, urbanization, on health in the developing country context in the Philippines. So this is all near and dear to my heart. I was an environmental activist against Crestwood expanding under Seneca Lake. Was the director of the Green Resource Hub for years, helping businesses develop triple bottom line practices. And then, of course, being an advocate, as a legislator. As I said, I've been working with EANY for years. They helped me craft 2 resolutions that were passed unanimously by the Tompkins County Legislature. I think both of them were, although I can't remember exactly, but one of them most recently was a constitutional addition that specifically adds the 15 words, or we didn't do that, it was urging the state to do it, but it was a resolution that our county passed, urging the state to add the right to clean air and water to our state constitution. And another was urging the state to put funding into the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. I'm sure Rob will cover this in greater detail, but as many of you may know, in 2012, the state comptroller put out a report saying that we have one of the oldest water infrastructure systems in the state, and estimated the cost of getting it up to speed to $80 billion. That's the combined water and sewer, so about $40 billion for each of those. And we have put several billion, maybe 3.5 if I recall last, into the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. And although that is certainly a chunk of money, it is nowhere near what is needed. Many of us know what is needed locally. And I'm going to talk more about my priorities at the end of this and then open it up for Q&A, just so you all know where I stand representing this district. This has been a lifelong journey for me, and EANY are some of my closest allies in this work. So with that said, Rob Hayes, the Director for Clean Water, that component of EANY, will present the 2020 update, what has been accomplished in 2020, where things stand in 2020, the hurdles of 2020, I think, and then the 2021 state priorities. I consider him a friend and a mentor. So with all of that said, I want to hand it over to Rob Hayes to open up this hour.
Well, thank you so much, Anna. And we have so enjoyed working with you at the local level these past few years and cannot wait until you're in Albany in January to get some stuff moving at the state level as well. So with that, good afternoon, everyone. It is great to see some familiar faces and names on here. So glad you could join us again for another iteration of our Ithaca Clean Water Forum series. I wanted to kind of kick off with an overview of EANY's Clean Water for All program. So Amanda, if we could go to the next slide, wonderful. And first I wanted to state that COVID-19 has really deeply impacted the work that we do. Clean water has never been more important than during this pandemic. I think we can all agree. It is essential for hand washing. It is essential for hygiene. It is essential for keeping people safe and healthy during this really, really scary time. And it can also be an essential component in our recovery from this pandemic, both from the public health pandemic and also the economic crisis that we're currently in. There is so much work that needs to be done to restore our natural resources and fix our water infrastructure and clean up chemical contamination. And all of that work can help create the good paying union jobs that can really, in the words of our newly elected president, help us build back better as we emerge from this pandemic. So with that kind of frame in mind, I wanted to talk through the 4 key areas that EANY works on to further that vision and truly protect drinking water all the way from the source to the tap. And the first bucket is, as Anna mentioned just a second ago, full funding for water infrastructure. And as many of you know, we have some of the oldest water infrastructure in the nation. Water main breaks are constant, sewage overflows are constant, and we're facing a lot of new threats as well, from emerging contaminants like PFOA and PFOS, to older legacy threats like lead service lines and the contamination that they are adding to drinking water. And so ensuring that New York State fully funds local governments in their efforts to replace this infrastructure, to fix our pipes, to stimulate local economies will be really, really key moving forward. The second point that I wanted to mention is that EA works to expand drinking water testing to ensure that everyone knows what's in their water. Because right now, not every New Yorker's drinking water is treated equally. If you live in a bigger city, in a larger community, your drinking water is probably being tested for more contaminants and more chemicals than someone in a rural community, certainly than someone with a private well. And we need to ensure that every New Yorker receives the same drinking water protections and has the information they need to both identify contamination and then clean it up where it's found. The third piece of work that we do is protecting source water and watersheds. And as all of you know, it is so much cheaper to protect our streams and our lakes and our rivers before pollution happens, rather than having to pay to clean it up once the damage is done. And so making sure that we are putting in place the legal and regulatory safeguards to make sure there is not overdevelopment of these critical resources, to make sure that there is not rampant pollution that is being allowed to be dumped in them, is another critical piece of the clean water work that we do. And finally, for the fourth bucket, we're working to guarantee affordable water for all New Yorkers. And this has been a piece of our work that has really come out of the pandemic. We know right now that there are millions of New Yorkers that can't afford to pay their utility bills, that are struggling to afford their water bills. And as families miss payment, that can lead to really crushing debt and ultimately to a water shutoff or a lien being placed on their home that might lead to foreclosure. And so we have to be doing everything possible as a state to prevent those outcomes and make sure that every single New Yorker has affordable water in their home during this time. And so Amanda, we can move to the next slide. And so before turning to how we want to realize those 4 key goals in 2021, I want to talk about what we were able to accomplish in 2020 and what remains to be accomplished from this year. And honestly, this was a pretty good year for clean water in New York. We had some really major wins that'll protect drinking water for millions of people. The first and closest to my heart, I've been working on this issue for quite some time, is that New York State finally established maximum contaminant levels for 3 toxic chemicals, PFOA, PFOS, and 1,4-dioxane. Many of you might be familiar with the water crises that arose a few years ago in Hoosick Falls, New York, and Newburgh, New York, where residents became aware of these chemicals that were previously unregulated, but were showing up at incredibly dangerous levels in their drinking water and was making people sick in those communities. And 1,4-dioxane has been a major contaminant on Long Island as well. And so following those crises, there was really a groundswell of public support and advocacy to make sure that New York State was establishing standards so that every water system would be testing for these chemicals in their drinking water, and that dangerous levels of contamination were cleaned up where it was found. So after many, many years of fighting the Department of Health on this, in August, we finally got those standards promulgated. There is now a maximum contaminant level of 10 parts per trillion for PFOA, 10 parts per trillion for PFOS, and 1 part per billion for 1,4-dioxane. We're kind of in the middle of water systems testing their drinking water right now. That should be completed by about early to mid next year. So we're really, it will be really important to watchdog closely the results of that testing and how the Department of Health responds to any exceedance to make sure that a transparent and accountable process is being followed to make sure that drinking water is cleaned up as soon as possible. So that was a great win in 2020, especially for those impacted communities. The second win that I want to mention is the New York State Legislature passed a utility shutoff moratorium in June of 2020. So right now, it is illegal for your gas, for your electric, for your telephone, or your water utility to shut off your water if you can't pay your bills right now, which is a critical protection for people struggling economically right now. The law also builds in some other protections to try and make payments affordable for people. It guarantees access to deferred payment agreements, and ultimately keeps this shutoff moratorium in place throughout the current COVID-19 state of emergency and even for 180 days thereafter. The catch here, though, is that this law expires on March 31st, 2021. And so I'll be talking about that for our 2021 priorities. But that's been a huge help to people in need during the pandemic. The third one that I want to mention is a ban on Pfas in food packaging. So Pfas is the broader class of chemicals that PFOA and PFOS fall into. There's probably, I think the latest estimate is 9,000 of these chemicals in this class, which is extraordinary. It's mind-boggling. And many have been shown to have the same kind of toxicological effects on human health. And there's really been a drive and a movement to regulate these chemicals as a class, not playing kind of individual whack-a-mole, chemical by chemical, that allows industry to continually kind of, slightly adjust the formula and escape needed regulation. So the New York State Legislature passed and the governor signed a ban on all of these chemicals in food packaging, which was really great to see, both to prevent those chemicals from kind of transferring to our food and then into our bodies, but also to make sure that we're reducing another source of PFAS waste in our waste streams. Because as we've been starting to see across New York State, PFAS has been showing up in landfill leachate and has been spreading into groundwater around these landfills. And so keeping PFAS food packaging out of our landfills will also help to keep our water cleaner in those areas. It was another great win. The governor just signed that fairly recently. And the last major win from 2020 is, after many, many years, a long, long battle, we finally closed a loophole in New York State that prevented fracking waste from being considered hazardous. This was something the oil and gas companies put on the books years and years ago to try to avoid the regulation that is needed for this radioactive and toxic substance. And New York finally closed that loophole this year. So we'll be watching to make sure the Department of Environmental Conservation adequately implements regulations that stops this waste from going into municipal landfills, from being, treated at wastewater treatment plants. This stuff is hazardous and it should be disposed of at a hazardous waste facility. And it looks like New York State has finally taken the first step to making that happen. So another great win there. I do want to mention two disappointments from this year. there were some things we were not able to accomplish and that we'll need to fight for in the future and going forward. And the biggest of these was the Environmental Bond Act. I know the last time we had come together as a group, there was a lot of excitement around the governor proposing a $3 billion bond act for the first time since the 1990s in his budget. And the potential that that bond act had for building climate resiliency and cleaning up drinking water and building out clean energy here in New York. We did have a success in getting it through the legislature during the budget. It was included in the budget that New York State passed in the middle of March last year. But unfortunately, because of the state's financial situation, the governor's administration decided to pull it and not put it on the November 2020 ballot, where New York State voters would have had a chance to approve it. This was certainly disappointing because this was really, this is a once in a generation opportunity to fund clean water and clean energy in the environment in New York. And we were disappointed that the governor didn't recognize the financial benefits that this could have brought to the state through stimulating economic development and creating good paying jobs on the ground. So I'll be bringing that up again in the next slide with 2021 priorities, but certainly a disappointing result for New York's environment and the environmental community. The second disappointment I want to mention is the streams legislation that the state legislature passed. I think this is something we've talked about in the past as well. New York State the state legislature passed a bill to protect 40,000 miles of Class C streams in New York and add them to New York's regulatory program, so no one could, bulldoze them or dump into them indiscriminately. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that bill just a few weeks ago, once again kind of citing costs to the state in terms of its implementation and enforcement. And once again, here we were disappointed that the governor didn't recognize the cost benefits that this bill would have had for New York State, how much cheaper it would have been for the state to protect our streams now rather than having to pay to clean them up going forward. So those are the really big updates at the state level from 2020. And now if we can switch slides, we'll talk about kind of what do we think we can accomplish in 2021 and what do we want to accomplish in 21? What is needed to ensure clean drinking water to all New Yorkers this year? And I won't cover all of these now because there's a lot, but happy to go back over any of this in the Q&A if anybody has questions. But I did want to mention just the first few. One is, as Anna was saying earlier, the need to prioritize clean water funding, even as the state faces a lot of economic and budgetary uncertainty. This is absolutely the moment when we should be investing in and supporting our communities, when we need support from government to create jobs and stimulate economic development that will ultimately help us recover from the pandemic and the economic crisis. And so it'll be important to advocate to try and win that funding and expand that funding. But we also know that that advocacy will be needed to make sure that these programs aren't cut either, because there will be a lot of pressure at the state level this year to cut funding rather than expand it. So we're going to continue to advocate to try and get the Environmental Bond Act reauthorized for next year and to grow the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, because we know how essential this funding is. So that's one of our first priorities for next year. A second priority is making sure that that utility shutoff moratorium does not expire. So I mentioned a little earlier that on March 31st, 2021, that's it. The law is off the books, and the millions of people that are behind on their water bills, their water utilities could shut off their water or place a lien on their home in the hopes of trying to recover revenue that they've lost during the pandemic. And we just have to make sure that this doesn't happen. And we were currently working with legislators in the Senate to come up with a proposal to make sure that those protections stay in place for New Yorkers who really need it right now. And I'll mention on this point, to just go back a second to what I was saying about water infrastructure funding and how essential that is for clean water right now. I also want to mention that state funding is essential for local governments right now, who are facing lost revenue during the pandemic and struggling to pay for services right now. That funding can help them with the revenue that they're losing from rates, help make them whole. So we're not leaving anybody behind in this. We don't want to leave our public water systems behind, and we don't want to leave New Yorkers behind. So it's another reason why that clean water funding remains so essential. And finally, the last priority I want to talk about now, before then turning it to Anna for a lot of what she's gearing up for in the legislative session, is jump-starting further emerging contaminant testing. We had a really big win with those MCLs for PFOA, PFOS, and 1,4-dioxane. But we also recognize that there are hundreds of other emerging contaminants in our drinking water that could make people sick. And many communities are simply not testing for those chemicals right now. Back in 2017, the state legislature passed a bill to expand emerging contaminant testing to every water system in New York. Previously, small water systems had been exempted from that testing. In fact, that's kind of what led to the crisis in Hoosick Falls. They would have discovered their pollution a lot earlier had that law been on the books. So the legislature passed this bill to expand that testing, but 3 years after they've done so, the Department of Health still hasn't implemented it. 2.5 million New Yorkers still don't know what's in their drinking water. And so we need to get that law implemented and get that testing to the people that need that information. And so there's actually another bill in the state legislature that would kind of force DOH and kickstart that process to get it started. And I wanted to mention here too, I'm sure we will be sharing these slides with all of you at after the presentations today. And I included the bill numbers in there. So if you want to go, say on the NY Assembly website, you can search for these bill numbers and actually find the text of this legislation in case you think it can be replicated in your community, or if you think that part of these laws and their implementation can benefit you in the Ithaca area. So with that, I think I will call it a wrap for looking back at 2020 and looking ahead to 2021. And in that vein of looking ahead and getting excited about future action, I might turn it back to Anna Kellis for a description of her priorities.
Thank you so much, Rob. One of the things that I very much appreciate about ENY is the succinctness and focus on just cutting straight through to what is happening, the bills that are happening, where people can focus. And what's most important for me is that everyone walks away from this hour feeling like they have things that they can do. I do want to note, again, looking at this list, we have some of our local environmental experts here on this list that have a really good handle on what's happening locally. So, and I'm going to step out and apologize for the fact that I have if you can hear my barking dog in the background. Welcome to COVID life. This is my office and home life merge. It brings humanity into everything and humility for sure. So as Rob said, I did want to focus a little bit on what my priorities are, but I also want to talk a little bit about what I've learned so far about the legislative process. And one thing that I'm hearing from people over and over and over again is, be patient and be determined. A lot of times, the majority of the times, it takes years to pass a piece of legislation. And I'm finally seeing sort of really deeply why. The state is pushing on so many different issues. I'm part of coalitions on housing, coalitions on revenue and tax the rich, on coalitions on racial justice, coalitions on the environment, each having their own agenda and, really figuring out ways in which they coalesce and their missions align is part of what I really want to focus on. For example, extending the moratoriums, the utility shutoff moratoriums. That is absolutely equally important to the housing group. Bringing that to the housing group, getting coalitions to align like that, I think will elevate certain issues. So, that's part of it. that I'm learning. And also, there are two responsibilities at the state level for a legislator, and one is passing legislation, but the other is working specifically with the executive branch and departments that are doing the enforcement. And that's more behind the scenes. And so I'm really seeing the extent to which work is that. And the third thing that is becoming more and more and more apparent to me, and why this talk is so important, is that having local municipalities pass legislation or resolutions that urge the state to do things, although it may feel frustrating because it's not actually directly doing something inside your local government, it will empower me to say I am truly advocating for and representing my constituents. So there are a lot of bills that Rob brought forward today, and a lot of initiatives. And I absolutely want to work with all of you to put forward legislation to urge me to do those things. And that's work that we can all do moving forward. So that's something I'd love for you all to sort of take with you from this as an action step. Obviously, what has been brought forward doesn't span the full gamut of all the issues that we know are here. But another thing that I've learned is, listen, watch, build allies. Coming in guns blazing, telling everybody what to do is not necessarily the best strategy. And starting with supporting the existing bills, because the bills that Rob has brought forward, these are ones that have not only been tested, but ones who have successfully gotten champions among my colleagues. And so supporting the bills that already exist is a really important first priority for me, so that people understand what my priorities are, and I can advocate and champion for them, and those messages will establish my priority as a legislator who's a champion for the environment. So that is part of what I will be doing. I did want to also acknowledge that there are issues here, as I said earlier, that are not legislative per se, but we have been struggling with. For example, Tompkins County has been trying to get a TMDL, total maximum daily load, for Cayuga Lake for years. Some of us have been reaching out to the DEC, and we've all gotten the same message over and over and over again. It's on its way, it's on its way, we're getting the report out. Same message over and over. That is something that I want to push on, and I would ask everybody here to help me push on. I have an email of the person at the DEC who's saying their report is coming, it's being reviewed, and will very soon be sent for public comment. That email I got June of this year. And I know of several people who've gotten that as early as 2 to 3 years ago. Some of the other issues, the Pfas issues that was brought up here, we can't really fight it unless we have data on how many there are in our water and what the content is. I'm a huge proponent of data. And with it, we can prove, and that's the biggest reason why industry has been blocking it, because they know once we have that data, game over. So I can't emphasize enough why that is so important. Another thing that Rob and I have talked about, and something we want to work on, is bringing all the advocates, the state advocacy groups together, so that we can really build a coalition with the champions in the Senate and the Assembly, so that we can coordinate our efforts. And that's really important. What I'm seeing is that a lot of different environmental groups, we all know we had the plan of, for example, putting taxes or fees on polluters, and we all have ideas of where we want that money to be spent. And if we don't coordinate our messaging, it's going to become overwhelming for colleagues. And we need to have very concise, clear, and simple messages of where revenue would come from and where it would be spent. And the fact that we already have funds in place, like the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, that the Clean Water Infrastructure Act put in place, and we've got estimates of the cost, that is hugely important. The Bond Act also being hugely important. I do want to note also that we we have noted, or at least I have noted, that a lot of the environmental initiatives that we have at the state level, behind the scenes sometimes, and sometimes publicly, lobby groups and advocacy groups for farmers are countering the efforts of environmentalists. And we're really in so many ways on the same page. So I would urge all of us locally, and at the state level, I can say that is something that I will dedicate to, is trying to find all of the ways that the farm community and the agricultural community and the environmental community are aligned. We have to identify all the opponents of our efforts and bring us all together. So that being one of them, because we have natural areas in which we are, our interests coalesce. So, I'm putting that out as an action step, because I know we have amazing groups here. We have probably more environmental groups here in this district, in Cortland and Tompkins County, per capita than anywhere in the country. That's something I'm proud of. That's something I certainly will emphasize. And brilliant people who understand everything that I'm saying here. So, I will continue to meet with all of you. I want to segue. Last time we all met in January of this year, we specifically talked about municipal needs. And the message that we got loud and clear, both EANY and myself, is the extent to which what Comptroller DiNapoli wrote in his report of being way behind the 8 ball of updating our infrastructure is something we are experiencing, tremendously here locally, with respect to culverts, with respect to stream, ditch mitigation or upgrading, with respect to our policies with, enforcing with farmers, and the impact of runoff into ditches and into our lake. There was like an endless number of issues. So for me, one thing that's really important is that reaching out to each of the municipalities, meeting with each of the municipalities, meeting with the groups like the Water Resource Council, the Environmental Management Council, meeting with the Cortland Legislature. I see Bo Harbin here. I'm so glad, so excited, and welcome, my friend. I need to hear from you about what those issues are. If you have reports, if you have summary reports of all of the needs, I need to compile those. My staff and I have talked about that. That will also empower me to fight for the Water Infrastructure Act, and get that funding here to our district. So those are some of the things. I'm gonna stop because I wanna make sure that we have a lot of time for Q&A. As I said, we have so many water experts here and environmental experts here already on the call, so open that up. And I have a 10-week-old little puppy who's crying at my door, so I might let him in to meet you all.
Thanks so much, Anna. And thanks, Rob. I'm looking forward to meeting this puppy. And
hey, everybody.
Oh, it's so cute.
This is my oxytocin.
Nice. It's my favorite part of Zoom. So let's open it up to questions. And thank you to those who have included some links to resources also and websites in the chat. That's very helpful. And we can talk a little bit more about collecting resources and sharing those out at the end. But I'll just open it up to questions. And if people also want to think about what 2021 priorities they would like us to think about, I'd be open to hear that as well. So I encourage people to share if they have thoughts on that. But I see a first question from Michelle about which groups are stalling Tmdls. I know, Anna, if you have more information on that.
Yeah, so when we talk about groups, the group that we have been, not group, it's a department. So it is right now at the DEC, and that is where we got the message that they are working on it. And I'm going to specifically read the message that we got from the DEC, and that should clarify. So Let me see if I can find it. Because I think that this is an important message. So my name is Kun Tang, and I am the program manager responsible for the Cayuga Lake Total Maximum Daily Load. Ms. Jacqueline Lendrum forwarded your email inquiry to me. I appreciate your interest on Cayuga Lake TMDL. I can inform you that the lake monitoring study and development of a model to characterize and quantify sources and impacts of phosphorus have been completed. DEC staff is currently in the process of completing the draft TMDL document. There will be an internal agency review of the draft TMDL for quality control. It will then be released for public review and comment. I do not have a specific date of the public comment period at this time. I will retain your name and contact information, blah, blah, blah. You're welcome to email me for updates. This is just obviously one that they were referring to for phosphorus. Obviously, this was really important with respect to HABs, something that we are dealing with that is expanding. I honestly think that the more people who reach out to them right now, this person, his email is Koon, K-O-O-N .tang, T-A-N-G @dec.ny.gov. Getting a flood of emails saying, so, I know that this is on its way. He's the one to speak to. So, that's where the holdup is right now. We need it to come out for public comment.
Hi, Darby. Would you like
Darby
to
might
add?
have an update.
Hi, Darby.
Yeah, well, I've also been reaching out to Director Tang, and the latest, I sent an email and response on the November 19th, and said, getting closer, still in review with me. I wanted to make sure it's technically correct. I sincerely hope to get it out by the end of the year. So that was the message slightly less than a month ago. I was gonna harass him again to see if the end of the year is still a goal or not. But yeah, I've had a few communications with Director Tang in the last few months.
We also have reports on emerging contaminants, and I appreciate, I saw Michelle put an update from the CCE website on that. These measurements, I know we have from the wastewater treatment facility, their research director, Jose Gonzalez, Jose, I just know him as Jose. He has put out specifically ones related to the byproducts of pharmaceuticals. And that is an issue because they cannot be broken down by the wastewater treatment facility. And we need collective data on those issues as well, emerging contaminants. So I wanted to note that as well.
Thanks. Brian, did you, not to put you on the spot, but I didn't know if you had something you wanted to add to.
Yes. Sorry, just a call came in at the same time. Just one opinion. I don't know. One opinion is that they were waiting on the Cornell University lake source cooling permit, which was actually finalized in June as one of the large sources. Potential one of the large. Players on the lake, and that they wanted to get that permit done before finalizing their TMDL. But that is done, and so I feel like, okay, it's still appropriate to be pressuring them about the TMDL development. But I think that was the idea, that there were a number of regulatory issues going on Cayuga Lake, and there was a sort of an order of operations that unfortunately they weren't telling people about. But I think that was the case behind the scenes. My opinion.
Thanks, Brian. Nice to see you. So we have a couple questions in the chat, including one that I believe is from you, Tien, though my name, I know I sent you the link. So, but I will hand it over to you, Amanda, if you don't mind asking some of these questions. And I also want to encourage people to turn on their videos if they are so inclined. It'd be great to see everyone and have a conversation as part of this open forum part for those who are in a place that they can do so. And yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Amanda, if you want to ask some of the questions. And people can also raise their virtual hand if they wish to ask a question directly as well.
Yeah, whichever way you prefer. If you raise your hand on camera, I can see you, or just type it in the chat or unmute yourself. We have a question from John Dennis. Is there any public funding available for local sampling of water resources for PFAS testing? One test at Eurofins Test America costs about $350 per sample, testing for about 17 types of PFAS or PFOS, so testing is not cheap.
That's a great question, John. And actually, for clarification, do you mean if an individual wants to get their water tested, or if and there's support for that, or if there's support for water systems getting their water tested?
Well, it's actually thinking of something a little different. Clean Cuba Lake Environmental Action now have a research team, so we go out and sample in various places. And as a former firefighter, volunteer firefighter, I've come to the idea that the present firefighting site next to the Ithaca golf course, way too close to the lake and to Fall Creek. You know, it's about 20 yards away from the creek, and they burn maybe 10 vehicles there a year. So there are a lot of heavy metals and volatile organics and things coming off that site, you know, during their fire training exercises. But, you know, I'm guessing the fire chiefs will say, oh, we got rid of PFAS containing foam, you know, 10 years ago, don't worry about it. But there are no water monitoring wells on that site. So there could be, you know, 50 years that are, you know, beneath the site as we speak, slowly coming out with each rainfall event.
Right. Have you been in touch with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation on this? Because I know they have done some monitoring of fire training stations around the state because of those concerns about PFAS contamination. I was wondering if they'd been in touch.
I haven't reached out, but that's a great idea. Thanks.
I think they would be able to help with testing if you needed it out there. Yeah.
I'm wondering also, Rob or Josh, if the Assembly Bill, the 7839 related to establishing a list of emerging contaminants, if that could be expanded to include, you know, upper limits or estimates of, you know, what would trigger cleanup funds.
Yeah, that's and honestly, it leads into a broader question that, you know, right now in New York, PFOA and PFOS are listed as hazardous substances. And so those are the two contaminants that can really trigger the Superfund process, that can trigger kind of funds flowing into your community to help with cleanup. But all of the other PFAS chemicals right now are not considered hazardous substances. And so it may be difficult to get funds for your community for cleanup when those chemicals are not considered hazardous substances or otherwise regulated in drinking water. So I think you raise a really good point, Anna, about the broader need to make sure that we're treating these chemicals as a class and that we are not just cleaning up instances of PFOA, PFOS contamination, but the entire PFAS family.
And what I'm seeing a lot in the legislative process, and explaining that to everybody here, and you know, we're in it for the long haul, is that sometimes bills, the process needs to be split into separate bills, where first you get past, you know, please give a list. Second, you get past, you know, that, you know, you have an upper limit, estimated limit. Third, you get past, you know, the funding. Sometimes it is easier to pass them stepwise like that than to pass it as a whole, I'm finding. And it really just depends on the coalition of support that you can get. So I don't know, Rob, if you've found that also to be the case.
Yeah, certainly. I'm trying to think of another good example on this idea. Well, and honestly, one piece might come from the water affordability context, right? So we were able to get done a moratorium on utility shutoffs right now, which is really, really key. But that policy in and of itself doesn't address, you know, the huge amount of arrears and water debt that people are probably building up right now. And we're going to need policies to address that as well and make sure that both water utilities and customers can stay whole coming out of the pandemic. So that's another issue where, you know, we were able to kind of get the first step done through the legislature, get that moratorium in place. But in terms of addressing the deeper structural issues, that's got to come next as a second and a third steps going forward.
So I'd like to ask the group too, I'm sure there's other questions, but what do communities, obviously funding, everybody needs funding, we know that. But the things that help us get funding obviously are information. And do people have questions or input on, what information would help you really capture the condition of your current water infrastructure, for example? Tony, I just saw your question. Yes, several people have put about that summit in this. I'm hoping to have a staff person attend that if I cannot attend all of it. I don't know if it's being recorded. I'm hoping that it is. But again, one of the things that I'm finding more and more is that, we need coalitions of people working together. So if there are people here who are going to it, and want to create this is just me and my can't help organizing, creating a Google folder where people take notes on the sessions that they're going to, make sure that there's videos, recordings of those sessions. There's no reason why we can't share them with each other. Divide and conquer is always my way on that. So, I think that that's something that we could and should follow up on after this.
Tian, I know you put a comment about watershed rules and regulations for Wasco Lake, and I don't know if you wanted to add or respond to Anna's question a moment ago as well. And nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Anna. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if you could keep an eye on the status of the watershed rules and regulations. That could be a very important tool for communities, give them some regulatory and enforcement authority. And they have been submitted to the state. Okay, I'm sure you're probably aware of them. And any information that you can provide would be helpful. It was kind of circling back to something that you said, that whole process was a wonderful example for us all in engaging all stakeholders and folding the agricultural community very much into the conversation. I have had some conversation with farmers and some soil and water people regarding the possible fate of those rules and regulations. And so any information that you could find out that might help us understand the review process and what some of the possible problems that may be pointed out in the proposed rules and regulations. It would help us all as we try to build these bridges that you've earlier referred to.
Yeah, I do. I wanted to respond to that. My office is in touch with Eileen O'Connor from the county there, and she has given us, oh, there she is. Actually, I'm gonna unmute you, Eileen. I'm so glad to see you here. Welcome, Eileen. Do you want to give us an update?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Sorry about that. So the rules and regs have not yet been forwarded to the state. They're sitting here ready to go. We've been COVID, but I hope to get it out by Friday. I just have to have my public health director sign a cover letter that's going to go with them. So the process that I understand it is, at this point, we need to forward them to the Bureau of Public Water Supply Protection at the Department of Health for their review, and they will then share the document with other partner agencies such as DEC and Ag and Markets and the Department of State, and I don't know what other. And then they will get back to us with either acceptance or saying that it needs editing. I would imagine from my experience back when they did the city of Syracuse's back 15, 20 years ago, I think it's more like 20, that they would make comments on the different sections if they had concerns. So everybody who's at the State Health Department now was not there then, back in, 20 years ago. So this will be a new process for them because no rules and regs have been adopted since the city of Syracuse and the city of New York adopted theirs. I do know, I've been told by some people at the state health department and also by some local farmers that Ag and Markets is going to have some real problems with some of the issues, specifically the requirements to have buffers between, the ag activity and streams. So we did have a lot of ag representation in the process, but I guess in spite of that, they still are objecting specifically to that provision.
Eileen, are they opposing any others? Because I heard, Ag and Markets, Farm Bureau at the state level also opposing this. And I just want to note that, and so I wanted an update on that, but also wanted to note for anybody who isn't familiar with this, the reason why this is so important is because it sets a precedent for local districts to be able to set their own rules and regs rather than them being dictated by the state that may not be able to create a, customize it to the needs specific to the municipality. So just wanted to note that why, even though this is not this district, why it is absolutely so critical for all of us on Cuba Lake, for the state in general.
So at the public meeting that the city of Auburn and the town of Owasco had to formally transmit the rules and regs to our office to then transmit them to the state health department, the farmers that spoke, which was the Farm Bureau, the Northeast Dairy Producers Association, and an individual farmer, it was the buffers that they were concerned about. Other impacts would be, the rules and regs would require the smaller farms that currently don't have to put together management plans to do that. So the big farmers, I don't think, are concerned about that because they already have to put together nutrient management plans. We are seeking funding. The Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council is seeking funding to assist with the smaller farmers putting together their plans, and we will be seeking money to offset the cost of the buffers. But this is going to be tough because, like Anna said, the state understands that this is setting a precedent, and if it passes for the Owasco Lake watershed, then other people concerned about water quality may also want to, put those provisions of protections in their own communities.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up one of the most important points, which is the impact on small farmers, and they are our natural allies. And one of the things that I find really important is to review anything that we're promoting and identify the potential shortcomings. Be honest with ourselves about, the limitations, shortcomings, weaknesses of anything that we're promoting, and then create aspects of any legislation or initiatives that mitigate those issues. So I really appreciate that there is consideration to try and find funding for small farmers, particularly also with the plans. And that I think needs to be part of this initiative to really pull apart the united front, the united ag front, because very often, obviously, as we all know, in the farming community, the smaller farmers are often left out. And I really believe that is an opportunity for environmentalists to build bridges with the small farmers.
Hannah, may I just ask Eileen a quick question?
Please. And then, it's the end of the hour, so I'm going to close up after you, but yes, by all means, Tian.
I know, Eileen, you were looking for resolutions of support, and I wonder if you've received ones that you want, or if there are people in this group who might be able to help you by providing those resolutions of support.
So thus far, we have resolutions of support from your agency, Tian, from the Seneca Homeowners Association, the Owasco Lake Homeowners Association, the Finger Lakes. I can't remember what they are called, but they're the Association of Lake Associations, and our Board of Health, the Cuba County Board of Health, and there's one more. We are still working on reaching out. the Owasco Lake Watershed, no, the Owasco Lake Watershed Lake Association is spearheading an outreach to try to get people to, you know, send letters of support. So if anybody here would like to send a letter of support, or if they have an agency that would like to send a letter of support, we do have like templates available that we could send to people to assist. But yes, any help would be appreciated.
And I think that it's really important that those, any resolutions or letters of support, it notes the fact right now, New York law prohibits counties from making laws that affect local farms. But there's a little bit of wiggle room in this because, you know, it has a public health significance. There's a public health issue related to this. So I think that, you know, any letters of support, that should be a central message that we are, you know, this is not in opposition to farmers. This is supporting farmers and the public health of, you know, the larger population, and that we have to work together. And so you're really hitting on the key points that can't be ignored by the state. Because otherwise the state will really come back and say, you know, this is prohibited. So.
Also, just to clarify, the rules and regs are not a local law. They really are part of public health law. That's how we're getting around that right to farm, which prohibits local governments from implementing their own regulations. If this gets adopted, it's going to be regulations under the public health law, state law.
So Josh, I want to hand it back to EANY.
Yeah, no, thank you for all the questions in this conversation. I know this is really important. We are at the end of our hour. We would like to follow up with a sort of an evaluation survey of the session, but as part of that, I'd like to include some spaces on the forum to gather information from all of you. I know some of you have put resources in the chat. Some of you still have some questions. So once we send that out, if you wouldn't mind sort of typing your questions in and sharing resources, and then we can, and anything else you wish to share with the group, and then we can compile those and send that out to everybody, just to try to make sure everyone has everything that's happening locally. And we're also considering organizing a virtual lobby day in Albany coming up in the next legislative session. And so we'll include a question there as well. If anyone is interested in participating, we can explore with you what that might look like virtually. And I will also just drop this into the chat just to link to one of the points that one of the campaigns Rob mentioned on our Get Out the Lead alert. I know, Anna, you mentioned a few sort of action steps. And yeah, please continue to join us for these. Reach out also in between these forums if you have thoughts on ways we can sort of better serve all of you. And we appreciate you participating. And thank you so much, Anna, as well. We're really looking forward to working with you in a new capacity in the new year. It's very exciting.
Yeah, no, it's a total honor. And, you know, I'll just end by saying there are a few environmental groups that really have the ear of legislators because you've earned the trust of legislators. EANY is certainly one of them. So, you know, we're all working on a local issue. I'm now working on state level, but EANY helps me get allies at the state level. So this, it's one of the only groups that I've worked with that works really hard to try and hear and elevate the voices of local communities. And so I also really appreciate that. And I thank you all for taking an hour to join us to educate us on what you're all seeing as the important local issues so we can elevate them. And this to me is a beginning of, you know, or continuation of a really important conversation between all of us. So this is an important bridge we're building. And thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I meant to add also, we are thinking about a climate forum specifically in the central New York area in the new year. So we'll be in touch about that as well. I know there are a lot of intersecting campaigns that you work on, and I'm sure there might be some interest in this group to participate in that as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.